The morning of my college graduation, I ironed my dress alone. The small apartment was silent except for the soft hiss of steam and the ticking kitchen clock above the sink. Outside my window, the city was waking slowly. Buses groaning down wet streets, neighbors dragging trash bins to the curb, distant birds arguing in the gray spring sky. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time after getting dressed. The pale blue dress I wore was not expensive. I had bought it on sale 3 months earlier and hidden it in my closet like a secret treasure. I touched the sleeves carefully, smoothing them over my thin arms, wondering if 62 was too old to feel nervous about graduation. Then I smiled at myself for even thinking such a thing. Dreams did not expire because hair turned silver. 4 years earlier, I had walked into a community college carrying a notebook that cost 99 cents and a fear I could barely hide. Most of the students were younger than my grandchildren. They typed quickly, spoke confidently, and moved through life with the certainty I had never known. Meanwhile, I still apologized every time I asked a question. But little by little, I learned. I studied at night beside the hum of an old lamp. I wrote essays while soup simmered on the stove. I memorized lectures while folding laundry. There were evenings I fell asleep over textbooks, waking with reading glasses bent against my cheek. Still, I kept going. Not because I wanted applause. Because after losing my husband years ago, after spending decades raising children who slowly stopped needing me, I needed to prove to myself that I was still alive inside. Education became more than a degree. It became the one promise I finally kept to myself. My graduation ceremony started at 11. At 8:30 that morning, I checked my phone. No messages. I told myself everyone was probably busy getting ready. At 9:15, I sent a photo of myself in my graduation dress to the family group chat. "Big day today," I wrote with a smiling emoji. For 20 minutes, nobody answered. Then finally, my son Daniel replied. But not about me. He sent 3 photos from the luxury beach resort where the family had gathered for my younger son, Ryan's engagement weekend. Ryan stood beside his fiancée under white flower arches overlooking the ocean. My grandchildren wore matching cream-colored outfits. Champagne glasses sparkled in the sunlight. Under the photos, Daniel typed, "Beautiful day for the family." That was all. No mention of my graduation. No good luck. No, "We're proud of you." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then another message appeared from my daughter-in-law. "Sorry we couldn't make both events." Ryan's weekend was already booked. Both events. As if my graduation were a neighborhood garage sale. As if 4 years of effort could be compared to a catered engagement party. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table because my knees suddenly felt weak. The strange thing about heartbreak at my age is how quietly it arrives. No screaming, no dramatic collapse. Just silence settling into places where love used to live. For several minutes, I simply stared at the untouched cup of coffee beside me. Cold now. I thought about every birthday cake I baked for those children. Every school uniform I washed by hand when money was tight. Every night I stayed awake worrying about fevers, heartbreaks, rent, and futures. And somehow, despite all those years, I had become optional. An extra detail. A woman they assumed would always understand. I almost didn't go to the ceremony. That is the truth I rarely admit. I stood near the front door holding my car keys, fighting tears that felt foolish and childish. Part of me wanted to crawl back into bed and pretend none of it mattered. But another part, a quieter, stronger part, whispered something I would never forget. Go anyway. Not because they came, not because they care. Go because you do. The auditorium was filled with noise, but I had never felt so alone. Families crowded the rows with balloons, flowers, cameras, and loud laughter that echoed against the high ceiling. Young graduates leaned into their parents' arms for photographs, while proud mothers fixed crooked collars and fathers wiped emotional tears when they thought nobody was looking. I sat quietly in the 3rd row from the back, holding my folded graduation program in both hands. Beside me, an empty seat remained untouched the entire ceremony. I kept glancing at it anyway. Hope is a stubborn thing. Even after disappointment arrives, hope keeps checking the door. When my name was finally called, I walked slowly across the stage, hearing polite applause from strangers. The dean shook my hand warmly and whispered, "You should be very proud of yourself." For one dangerous second, those words almost broke me, because sometimes kindness hurts more than cruelty. I smiled for the camera, accepted my diploma, and walked back down the stairs carefully so nobody would notice my trembling hands. After the ceremony ended, graduates rushed toward their families like rivers returning home. I stood alone near the side exit. A young girl in a black cap accidentally bumped into me while running toward her parents. Her mother laughed and pulled her into a tearful hug while her father held flowers almost too large for her arms. I looked away quickly, not because I was bitter, because grief becomes heavy when it has witnesses. Outside, the spring air carried the smell of fresh rain. People gathered under the cloudy sky taking pictures, celebrating futures that suddenly seemed wide open. I watched them from a distance for several minutes before finally asking a passing student if she could take one photo of me with my diploma. "Of course," she said kindly. I stood near a brick wall covered in ivy and smiled softly. When she handed my phone back, I thanked her and looked at the picture. I looked smaller than I imagined. Older, too. But my eyes looked different. Steady. On the drive home, my phone buzzed constantly. For one brief moment, my heart lifted. Maybe my family had remembered. Maybe they had finally realized what today meant. But when I stopped at a red light and checked the screen, I saw notification after notification from social media. More engagement photos. Ryan kissing his fiancée beside the ocean. Daniel raising a champagne glass. My grandchildren dancing beneath string lights. Hundreds of comments poured beneath the pictures. "Perfect family. So proud of you all. Beautiful celebration." I stared at those words until the light turned green. That evening, I called Daniel. I should not have. Some part of me already knew the conversation would wound me, but mothers spend their lives searching for explanations that rarely come. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice distracted and loud with party music in the background. "Mom, can I call you later? We're in the middle of dinner." I swallowed hard. "I just thought maybe you forgot today was my graduation." Silence. Then a tired sigh. "We didn't forget." The words hit harder than if he had yelled. I gripped the phone tighter. "Then why did nobody come?" Another pause. When Daniel finally spoke again, his voice carried something colder than anger. It carried honesty. "Mom, we're focused on Ryan right now. He's building something important. We have to support the child we believe will make us proud." I felt my chest tighten. Before I could answer, he continued quietly. "We just don't expect much from you anymore." Not cruel. Not loud. Almost casual, as if he were discussing weather. "I cannot fully explain the pain of hearing your own child reduce your life to disappointment, especially after spending decades loving them without conditions." For several seconds, I could not speak at all. In the background, I heard laughter, clinking glasses, music, happiness continuing easily without me. Then Daniel said, softer now, almost impatient, "You understand, right?" And that was the moment something inside me changed forever. Not dramatically, not angrily. A door simply closed. I realized I had spent years begging quietly for scraps of emotional respect from people who had grown comfortable receiving my love without returning it. That night I did not cry. I sat alone by the window in complete silence, watching headlights pass through the darkness below. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to explain away the hurt. I simply allowed myself to see it clearly. The weeks after graduation were strangely quiet. At first, my family still called occasionally, but every conversation revolved around Ryan's engagement, wedding plans, investment ideas, or expensive vacations. Nobody asked where I had placed my diploma. Nobody asked what came next for me. And slowly, I stopped offering pieces of myself to people who only listened halfway. I did not argue. I did not confront anyone. I simply became quieter. There is a kind of heartbreak that teaches you how to sit peacefully with your own company. At first, the silence felt sharp and unfamiliar. I would reach for my phone out of habit, thinking about sending photos, updates, little moments from my day. Then I would stop myself. Because I finally understood something painful. Love should not feel like auditioning for attention. So instead of chasing my family's approval, I turned toward the one person I had ignored for most of my life. Myself. 3 weeks after graduation, one of my former professors called me unexpectedly. Professor Helen Carter was a calm woman with silver curls and observant eyes that missed very little. "I've been thinking about you," she said warmly. "Have you ever considered opening your own consulting service?" I almost laughed. At 62, with modest savings and no business experience, the idea sounded impossible. But she kept talking. Over the years, I had quietly become one of the strongest students in community development and small business organization. My final research project, helping older women rebuild careers after personal loss, had impressed several local organizations. "You understand people," she told me. "That matters more than you realize." Nobody had spoken to me like that in years. Not as someone useful. Not as someone capable. That conversation stayed with me long after we hung up. For the next several months, my world became small, disciplined, and deeply private. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, made tea, and sat beside my kitchen window with notebooks spread across the table. I researched grants, attended free workshops, and learned how to build a small consulting agency that supported women restarting their lives after divorce, widowhood, or late life career changes. The work moved slowly, painfully slowly. Some days I doubted myself completely. I remember sitting at my desk one rainy evening, staring at unpaid invoices and wondering whether Daniel had been right about me all along. Maybe I was too old, too invisible, too late. But then little things began happening. One client recommended me to another. A local nonprofit invited me to speak. A women's business center offered me shared office space. For the first time in decades, people listened when I spoke. Not because I was someone's mother, not because I sacrificed for them, but because my experiences carried value. And with every small success, I felt something inside me returning quietly to life. Confidence does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows softly, like sunlight moving across a floor. During those 8 months, my family barely noticed the changes. Ryan's wedding consumed their attention completely. Social media remained filled with parties, expensive dinners, smiling photographs, luxury hotels. Occasionally, Daniel would text, "Hope you're doing okay," or, "Sorry we've been busy." I answered politely every time. Short messages, no bitterness, no emotional explanations. Something had shifted inside me after that graduation night. I no longer wanted to convince people to value me. I wanted peace more than validation. One afternoon, Lily, my granddaughter, came to visit unexpectedly. She sat at my kitchen table watching me organize paperwork for my growing business. "Dad says you've been really busy lately," she said carefully. I smiled faintly. "I suppose I have." She hesitated before asking, "Did it hurt your feelings? The graduation thing?" Children notice truths adults try to bury. For a moment, I looked down at my teacup, watching steam curl into the air. Then I answered honestly. "Yes," I said softly. "Very much?" Lily's eyes filled immediately with guilt that did not belong to her. So I reached across the table and held her hand gently. "But sometimes," I told her, "pain teaches us where we should stop pouring our love." She never forgot those words. Neither did I. By the 8th month, my little consulting agency had grown beyond the borrowed office space. With help from grants and partnerships, I signed papers for a modest brick building downtown. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. And standing in front of those doors for the first time, keys trembling in my hand, I realized something extraordinary. The family who underestimated me had accidentally given me a gift: silence. And inside that silence, I finally heard my own worth. The day I received the keys to my building, I arrived an hour early. The street was still quiet, washed pale gold by the morning sun. A bakery across the road had just opened, and the smell of warm bread drifted through the cool air. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the small brick building in front of me. It was not enormous, not glamorous, no shining glass towers, no luxury cars waiting outside, but the sign above the entrance carried my name: Margaret Hale Consulting. For several seconds, I simply looked at it, unable to move. 8 months earlier, I had sat alone at my graduation while my family celebrated someone they believed mattered more. Now, I held keys to something built quietly from every ignored phone call, every lonely evening, every moment I chose not to give up on myself. I unlocked the front door slowly. Inside, sunlight spilled across polished wooden floors. Fresh paint carried that clean scent of beginnings. There were still unopened boxes near the walls and empty shelves waiting to be filled, but to me, it already felt alive. Not because it proved anyone wrong, because it proved I had not abandoned myself. I walked into my tiny office near the back window and placed my old graduation photo carefully on the desk. The same photo a stranger had taken for me outside the auditorium. I smiled at it softly. "We made it," I whispered. Around noon, one of my employees insisted on taking a picture of me standing outside the building. "At least stand proudly," she laughed while adjusting the camera angle. "You built this place." So I stood beneath the sign wearing a simple cream-colored coat, one hand resting lightly against the door. No dramatic pose. No performance. Just peace. That evening, after staring at the picture for nearly 20 minutes, I finally sent it to the family group chat. No caption. No explanation. Just the photo. Then I placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter and continued making dinner. 10 minutes later, it began vibrating. Again, and again, and again. By the time I looked at the screen, there were 17 missed calls. Daniel, Ryan, my daughter-in-law, even relatives who had not spoken to me in months. Messages flooded in one after another. Mom, why didn't you tell us? This is incredible! We had no idea you were doing all this. Call us immediately. I read every message calmly. Then I set the phone down again. For the first time in years, their urgency no longer controlled my emotions. Later that night, Daniel finally reached me. His voice sounded breathless, almost shaken. Mom, that building is yours? Yes, I answered quietly. A long silence followed. Then he said something I never expected to hear. We didn't know. I stood by the kitchen window looking out at the dark city below. I know, I said gently. His voice lowered. Why didn't you tell us? The question settled heavily between us. Why didn't I tell them? Because for years, every dream I shared had been minimized before it even had room to breathe. Because people who constantly doubt you eventually teach you to grow in private. Because some wounds become too tired to keep asking for support. But I did not say any of that. Instead, I answered with the truth that mattered most. I think, I said softly, I finally learned how to build a life without needing permission to feel proud of it. Daniel grew very quiet, and for the first time I could hear regret in his silence. Not guilt over the business, not even the building. Regret over everything he failed to see while chasing people he thought mattered more. A few days later, my family asked to visit the office. I agreed. Not out of revenge, not for validation, but because peace sometimes means allowing people to face the consequences of their blindness without helping them escape it. When they arrived, they looked around slowly at the busy desks, clients waiting in the reception area, women laughing during workshops I had created. Ryan stared at me differently that day, almost carefully, as if he were meeting me for the first time. Before leaving, Daniel hugged me longer than usual. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. And though the words came years late, I accepted them quietly. Not because I needed them anymore, but because bitterness would only reopen doors I had finally learned to close. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my office as sunset painted the walls amber and gold. And for the first time in my life, I understood something deeply important. The greatest form of emotional strength is not proving people wrong. It is no longer shrinking yourself for those who failed to see your worth. Some people only recognize your value after your absence teaches them what your presence truly was. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a wounded heart can do is heal without applause.